Folks, the views and opinions expressed in this episode of the Military Matters Review are solely those of Rod Rodriguez, myself, and Desmond Farris.
That's me.
They do not reflect or represent those of Stars and Stripes. So don't get us fired, okay?
I need this job. Big brother.
Drinking, I can't do it. You know what I mean?
When I say legal, it's still federally illegal.
Is everyone here high or is it... All right, folks, welcome to the Military Matters Review. I'm Rod Rodriguez.
And I am Desmond Farris.
So we just finished airing episode 1, and that was on cannabis. Now, I can tell you right off the bat, the first thing I heard from people was, are you trying to convince us that cannabis is good? Are you a pothead? When did you become a hippie about, this cannabis and weed and dope? And, I had to take them back to the first episode, Des. I had to tell them like, hey, if you listen to that episode, if you listen to episode 1, I tell you right off the bat, I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I'm simply trying to help you unpackage the cannabis discussion with some real facts and maybe dispelling some of the things that we thought before.
Well, I too was tapped about our previous topic, and my reception was a little bit different than yours, Rod. Being a disabled vet and everything, I think some people thought that we were advocating for them, but we were really just trying to give the facts that we were able to find.
I know some folks that are going to be listening to this, most of the people, and maybe I'm wrong. I'd love to see our statistics. I'd love to see our demographics. Folks, if you think I'm wrong, please let me know.
Please let them know.
I really don't think that a lot of the Stars and Stripes listeners are familiar with cannabis. I don't think they're very familiar with the difference between cannabis and marijuana, which is one of the reasons I really thought it was important to bring that distinction up in that episode. You just finished saying that it's cannabis or marijuana are recreational now in DC. And it makes me cringe now to hear that, because after that episode, I see the difference between cannabis and marijuana. And I think that in that differentiation, that's where that unpacking piece comes into play. Because when I say cannabis, I don't mean marijuana. They're not the same thing. Marijuana is the high THC. That is the processed piece. That is what you're going to smoke. That is what you're doing. That's what people associate cannabis with. That's what they're thinking. Like, oh, I'm going to have I'm going to smoke marijuana, and that's what I'm doing. Cannabis it's the umbrella over which all of this stuff lies. So when we say cannabis, we're talking about the medical use. We're talking about the recreational stuff. We're talking about a lot of different things when we say cannabis, but we're only talking about one thing when we talk about marijuana.
That's a good perspective.
And that's the perspective that I was trying to bring out in our story on cannabis. And let me tell you a quick story behind the story. So a quick disclaimer to everyone. I do host another show called the Warfighter Hemp Podcast. It's a wonderful company that I work with. It's veteran owned company. And I was at the VFW conference in Orlando last year. And I was at the Warfighter Hemp booth. So I produce their shows and I'm getting interviews for their podcast. And I noticed that a lot of older veterans, maybe in their late 50s, early 60s, they're walking by the booth and they would say, hemp, huh? Is everyone here high or is it, are you guys seeing things? And we're like, no one's high. It was a very odd thing. It was a very odd, it was a reaction to seeing the word hemp, right? So I would sit down with some of these folks and I was like, hey, do you use cannabis products? Do you indulge in recreational or do you use medicinal? And they would say, no, I don't do any of that stuff. I'm like, great. Let me talk to you. Let me interview you. I'm really curious about what your perspective is on this industry. And what I walked away from was a lot of former police officers. So as you probably know, there's a lot, the transition between military service member and police officer. So I think there's a huge feeder into law enforcement from the military. So when they go into that law enforcement world, it's very anti-drug, very counter drug. Talking to these older vets, there was this perspective that all cannabis is marijuana. All cannabis is high levels of THC. All cannabis will get you high, and that getting you high is the goal of cannabis. And when you look at the demographics for the VFW or the American Legion, they're older vets, but they're the same veterans. They're the same demographic that probably need to know more about CBD. They need to know more about what the different effects are from cannabis. So that was the goal. And I'm glad to hear that people on your end were like, hey, thank you for advocating for us. But to be perfectly honest, I wasn't trying to advocate. I wanted this story to be something that was really neutral. But honestly, after listening to it, I don't think it was that neutral.
It definitely, it's not that it wasn't that neutral, Rod. It was the fact that we were bringing out facts and statistics and information that had been pushed down, held back for a long time. And then this big stigma had came up around it. And it's what everybody knew and everybody grew up. Like you stated in the episode, the dare, and all that stuff. So when we start putting out all this information, which that's what we're doing, info and stats, it came out as avocation, I guess you would say, because advocacy, yeah. Because by giving the information, more people are starting to think, oh, maybe it's not bad for me. Maybe it's not going to get me hooked on all these other drugs and all this other stuff. Maybe it actually might help my joint pain or help me sleep or help my PTSD. If that's the point they're talking about advocacy, I'm all about it. If it's, hey, we're advocating, I'm going to go get high, bro. No, that's not the point. We just want to give you guys the statistics, the facts, and let you be the judge. But remember, it is still against the UCMJ. It is still federally illegal in all places. And then it is legal recreationally in only a few places. So always know your laws.
Yeah. And that's exactly right. I don't necessarily dislike the tone of the cannabis episode. We do have a psychiatrist. We do have an ER doctor, both of them very knowledgeable about both medicine and cannabis. I really wanted to get the VA. I wanted to get their perspective, and I reached out to them. I even talked to one of the doctors that's actually doing the research right now on cannabis and PTSD and a couple of other things. I'm not going to bust anybody out because you know what? I get it. Everybody has to follow orders. We're all used to, doing whatever command says. At first they were really excited. They were really like, hey, we can't wait to do this. It'll be great. And then they said the magic words, let me check with higher.
We know what that means.
We all know what that means. And that's exactly what happened. I got emails back that said, hey, basically, thank you for reaching out to the VA. Unfortunately, at this time, we're unable to participate in this interview. And that was okay. That's fine. But here's my problem with that. And VA, hey, check it out. If you're listening, here's my problem with your lack of participating in this interview. Transparency, 100% transparency. Look, they're not exactly at the top of our most loved organizations. They're on the top of our most requiring improvement lists. I love what the VA does when they do what they do in theory. And that's the thing. I know a lot of veterans that are receiving great benefits and the VA is doing great things for them. And I think that's amazing. But there you go. And there's a lot of good that they do. And I do not subscribe to the let's crap all over the VA arguments. It's really freaking hard to run an organization that has to be attentive to millions of people. Are they in the millions
I think so
of veterans?
Now.
They might be. I don't know how many veterans they have to deal with, but everything from I need a prescription on my meds to, I'm 150% destroyed. I need assistance and everything. I mean, that's a lot. That is a huge gamut of people that you have to care for. So I get it. But when we're talking about research, when we're talking about something that is important to a lot of different veterans, at least having the conversation, even if you got to tell me like, look, we can't really talk about this, this, and this. I offered a couple of ways to go about the conversation. I was just shut down on every turn. Fine. The other person that I reached out to was a professor at Harvard. Again, not going to bust him out. It's your choice. If you don't want to talk to us, that's fine too. But this individual had written a couple of academic papers on, basically cannabis is not a good alternative to anything. And here's why. And he gave a couple of interesting perspectives. And I didn't want to represent those papers without, I'm not an expert. So I'm not the SME on this stuff. I'm not going to go and read this guy's paper and pretend like I can project, and especially an academic paper. Maybe if you wrote an article for like Wired or something.
Podcast Weekly.
Yeah, something. But when you're talking about like a journal for a medical journal entry, like I'm not even going to attempt to translate that for you. Mara Gordon is an expert. She is a researcher in the field of cannabis. And one of the things she and I have talked about in the past was how we look at cannabis and we're not thinking of it as a medicine. We're not thinking of it in the same respect as Motrin. People are going maybe a little too far in the cannabis craze. They're like, oh, I'm going to go to a dispensary and pick up some cannabis, and it's going to help me this and that. You're not looking at how cannabis could interfere with the medicines that you're on already. I believe Dr. Kalsi touched on that during the podcast. And we've talked about in the past also is that there could be crystallization. There could be things that can happen. There's things that could happen between what you're taking with your cannabis and if you're on a huge variety of medications, those could interfere, which is why it's so important to talk to your doctor before you jump in and say, oh, I have this problem, cannabis. I'm just going to jump in and try that without thinking. I mean, would you look at any other drug, whether it's, cannabis or, you cannot take a protein supplement without seeing a label that says, consult your physician before you take this. Because you just don't know how it's going to interfere, if it's going to interfere.
See, Rod, that's where I have to disagree with you, like we do sometimes. I look at it the opposite way. When you go to your doctor and your doctor's like, hey, take this pill, it's going to do this. Most people are going to just take the pill. Not a lot of people would necessarily do the research. Some will. Like all vets, hey, here's your 800 milligrams of Motrin. Get better.
But they should.
You're right. But you're relying on that doctor who went to all that schooling and all that education to give you what you need to fix your ailments. And
a lot of doctors don't even know much about cannabis.
That's my point.
That's the problem.
It's not necessarily that it's the problem. The point is that it's been around so long, and the documented, whatever's been documented, deaths or ailments from it are far and few between because it wasn't documented. One person can look at it, it wasn't documented, or one person can look at it, maybe it didn't happen. But since the creation of these pain meds, Vicodin, Flexerols, and all this other stuff, even all the way down to Motrin that is killing your kidneys because your body doesn't know how to process it. When you get to all this stuff, there is documentation of the side effects of this medicine will do this, take this medicine to counteract that, which then you take this medicine that will hold your levels down for that. And then you end up on that slew of medicines. And of course, you're not going to know how cannabis is going to interact because you're on a slew of medicines that are been created to counteract and interact with each other and yada yada yada, when this one supplement, and I'll call it a supplement even though it's an illegal drug right now in most places, this one herbal supplement.
Well, it's not an illegal drug in some places. Like California has Compassionate Care Act. It is legal there as a drug for medicinal reasons.
Legal, it's still federally illegal.
Yes, it is illegal federally, but we're still looking at states, and I'm a big states proponent. I'm huge for that, but we're still looking at it as a medicine.
But to my point, when it's illegal federally, obviously you're not going to get the studies because you're not going to get the federal grants. You're not going to get the schools diving into the research as far as they can in the states that aren't legal. So of course we don't have documentation on how it interacts with this medicine or that medicine because legally by federal mandate we can't. So
right, and it worries me that whoever is. So when we do this research, which again we come back to the VA and their choice, their decision not to talk to us.
I understand why. Because there's not enough information for them to make a statement. Because at any point they can make a statement and it be wrong.
But they could have at least talked to us about the process that they're going through to do the research. You don't have to tell me the results, but you can talk to me about how are you testing this? How many are you testing this with 100 vets, 1,000, 3,000? Are you doing live trials? Are you doing a questionnaire?
But they're not going to do that. You know why? Do you not remember you got anthrax vaccinations? You got prior to that you had the polio vaccinations. You had the Tuskegee experiments. All veteran government ran things that a lot of stuff went bad. So why would they're not going to openly discuss this stuff, because if it goes bad,
more reason to have transparency, more reason for them to come forward and say, hey, we're not doing any of those things. So my thought wasn't, as dramatic or as evil as Tuskegee, but I was wondering like, well, what's your test? Like, are you, again, there's a difference between a questionnaire and, doing observations and having people come in and doing blood tests. What's the process? What are we doing? How does this look? I get it's the VA, but who else is playing into this? Who else, what other organizations are part of this research? Because the big fear in the cannabis industry is that big pharma,
Big Brother.
Big pharma will come in and be like, oh, we did a clinical trial and cannabis it's bad. It causes cancer. Like what? Who made this study? And it's XYZ.
That goes back to who?
Big pharma
that goes back
company.
To who that we talked about in our episode. The act that basically banned marijuana.
Oh yeah.
And it goes back to that. I can't remember what the exact name of it.
Yeah, it's okay.
But it goes back to
our listeners will correct us.
It goes back to what we were talking about in the episode of Big Brother coming down and shutting stuff down, or taking it.
I hate jumping into conspiracies. I do.
But you have.
But the problem is,
have to.
We've been proven right a couple of times. Like, it's not a conspiracy if you're right. If it's actually happening. You said it yourself. I mean, you brought up a great point. Tuskegee, there's been a couple of situations in our history where it wasn't a conspiracy. It wasn't some crazy harebrained scheme. It was happening. I worry, and this is where I think transparency is really important. They need to be had. They need to be talked about. I wish the VA had been a little more willing to talk about at least the process, at least the research. To do that would have been, in my opinion, and I think it would have been also, not just my opinion, but I think it would have been good for our listeners, for people who might be on the fence about cannabis, maybe not to convince them either way, but at least tell them, hey, we're on it. We're looking into it, and here's how we're doing that.
I don't agree. You know why? Because the leaders of change always come from the market. they push stuff forward. Social media wasn't a big picked up thing with the military when it first came out. Oh, it's going to be a breach of security and this and all that. Now you got first sergeants giving messages out to their troops via Facebook groups and stuff.
Oh yeah.
So when I say the way the CBD cannabis industry is going, where it's all being driven by private sector, just like a lot of different things are being driven by private sector and then adapted by the government, this is going to be the same way. Let all the tests come privately and all that stuff and get funded, but the private sector will be the proponent of change in this industry, and then there will be one person that will be like, you know what, we need to fix this. But at the same time, the private sector does that as well, in which led to a opiate crisis or what
use or crisis. But you know what? Here's the thing. I'm really interested in. We talk a lot about cannabis in the medicinal sense. Like, you got a problem, you're going to use cannabis. We rarely talk about recreational use because it seems so crazy.
What's so crazy about it, though?
I don't know. I think it's perfectly within reason to use marijuana for recreation. We live in a world where we glamorize and we worship at the altar of tobacco and alcohol. And it's funny because I saw them raise the age of tobacco to 21.
Yep, they did that last
year. Which I thought was really interesting. The idea that we're going...
I have my conspiracy reasons behind that.
Oh, I'm sure you do. And I do too.
And it all revolves around the cannabis industry.
I think a lot of it has to do with the tobacco industry as well. I think there's a lot of this. And when you're looking at vapes, look, I hate vaping. I think vaping looks stupid. But whatever.
But that's your personal opinion.
That's my personal opinion. But to make vapes or vaping products illegal because of this like popcorn lung thing, I do believe the research has proven, or at least pointed to the fact that those cases are related to illegal vaping products that were defective, that had problems in them. These are people that were getting sick from those vaping products were getting them black market vaping products, right?
Right.
But they decided to just do this big blanket illegal thing. They're all bad. They're all bad.
Who does that sound like?
Kind of like what they did with marijuana back in the day. Okay. Interesting. Like cannabis. It's all bad. Well, wait a minute. What are you talking about? It seems very suspicious to me that
when we had a record high or a record low, if you want to put it that way, of people actually walking away from tobacco products.
Right. No. You're absolutely right. I think that people were walking away from tobacco products.
Less and less youth were starting tobacco.
And again, I would love. And hey, tobacco people, tobacco industry, if you're interested in being on the show, I'd love to talk to you. I want to know more about your maybe, the lobbying that went into making this stuff happen. But I'm interested in the jump from 18 to 21 because we're still looking at big government. We're looking at government jumping into what you can and cannot do and when you can and cannot do it. That's a subject that's always fascinated me. But we still look at alcohol, and we still have, you have the class stick store.
Yep.
On Post, every Post has it. We still sell alcohol. We still look at alcohol as being, our drug of choice for a good time. I know a lot of folks have always, the big argument is, well, if you legalize marijuana in the force and the service members, they're going to show up to work high. And I'm like, well, they could show up to work drunk, and some do.
Yep, they could,
and they get busted. They should get busted.
Or they can come to work and take 22 smoke breaks, plummeting productivity at work.
Or they could come to work with their opiates and like, hey, I have to take this every 3 hours, and they're still doing their jobs. So I get it, and I think Dr. Kalsi hit that on the head during the interview. He said, basically, there's nothing to prevent Joes and from abusing whatever they're on. There's nothing to prevent you from doing that. But the fact remains that there are plenty of militaries, there are plenty of places in the world where the Canadians made it legal for their service members to participate in recreational marijuana, but they have strict protocol here. It is up to the it's commander's discretion. They have to abide by local law, the provincial laws, or, the Canadian equivalent of a state. There's a lot that has to go. You can't, it's not just willy-nilly across the board, like everybody gets to go smoke weed. It is, you can smoke weed, but there are certain times, certain places, and you can't do it within these many hours of your duty hours. There's a lot that goes into this, but it's the same thing that you do with alcohol. I remember when I was a single soldier living in the barracks, Friday night, as soon as they would, 1700, you're all released for the weekend, people would rush into the rooms, crack open a beer, and put it next to the door.
Oh yeah.
So that way, when you get a dude and you knock on your door, like, hey man, you got duty tonight. Oh, I can't. I'm drinking. I'm drinking. I can't do it. You know what I mean? There's no different. Again, these are the opinions of Desmond and Rod.
With the closing on this, the fact that we're not one way or the other, we just want to get facts out there. Only thing I want to make known is I've watched people go down that opioid gateway. I've watched people go down the alcohol gateway. There's even been people that have gone down the porn addiction gateway. And what do all three of these things have in common that can also have in common with marijuana if it became legal to use? It's all addictions. And addictions, I believe, stem from something else within the person. Don't go down that road if I can't stop at one drink. That means you're not going to stop at one joint, or you're not going to stop at one pill. It's not the fact that it's the actual substance. It could be the users.
All right, folks, if you're interested in joining this conversation, and we hope that you are, you can tweet me at RodPodRod. I'm on Twitter. I love to see what you have to say about this episode. Agree with me, disagree with me. I'm open to all of it. I really am. I don't keep I'm an admittedly pro cannabis person, but I am not closed-minded. I'm open to new research. I'm open to discussing both sides of this. I really want to hear counterpoints to the cannabis discussion. I really am interested in hearing why cannabis is not a good idea, especially from medical professionals. I would love to talk to a doctor who's like, this is not good, and here's why. That's what I'd love to hear. Give me something to really kind of, let me chew on something different other than cannabis is great. The problems are, to me, I think the biggest issue is I keep hearing the same arguments against it, and those arguments don't seem to hold water to me. I would like to hear those arguments again, or hear a different perspective on those arguments from people who will support it with evidence, who will support it with, science or demographics and, research, something. Just give me something.
That's right, Rod. And like you, I want to hear tweets, questions as well. And they can tweet me or hit me up at dpodfarris, DPODFARRIS. I don't got many fans and stuff like that, but I'll get on there and talk to you guys. And maybe you guys got some topics we can talk about as well.
This was the Military Matters Review with Rod Rodriguez and Desmond Farris. Be sure to check out our next episode. It's going to be about red flag laws. Don't know what those are? Kind of curious about how that affects you? Check out our next episode. So make sure you like, listen, subscribe, and share this podcast with everybody that you know, veterans, service members, and the people that support them. And we'll see you at the next episode.